It's 1971. The Civil Rights Act has been signed, but in towns like Willow Bend, Mississippi, equality is just ink on paper. Here, a black man can still lose his life for loving a white woman. And Malcolm Pierce crossed that line, with both eyes open. Now, 50 years later, his white wife lies dying, her hand wrapped in his. Her final words shake the foundation of their entire marriage and lead him down a path of secrets, betrayal, and unexpected redemption. Stay tuned to uncover the terrifying secret and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Back in the 70s, Malcolm Pierce knew how to survive in Willow Bend. He was a black mechanic, quiet, focused, careful. He fixed what was broken and kept his eyes on the ground, because a wrong look in this town could cost you your life. But Saturday nights were different. Behind a fish market on the edge of town, down a narrow flight of steps, was a room that didn't exist on maps. The underground jazz bar. It wasn't safe, but it was the only place where Malcolm didn't have to shrink himself. He played piano there, fluid, sharp, alive. It was the only time he let his soul speak. And that's when she walked in. Eleanor Whitmore, the judge's daughter, born into money, tradition, and control. She grew up in a house where dinner was quiet, expectations were loud, and her life was already mapped out for her. She wasn't supposed to wander. She wasn't supposed to ask questions. She certainly wasn't supposed to end up in a room like this. But Eleanor had spent years suffocating in silence, and when she heard the music floating out from that fish market, she followed it like breath. She didn't belong there, but she didn't care. And when she saw Malcolm at the piano, something in her stilled. Not fear, not rebellion, recognition. After the set, she approached him. "Is it always like this here?" she asked. He didn't answer, because a white woman standing this close was already a risk. But she didn't leave, and neither did he. That's how it began, with a glance neither of them should have shared, and a silence that already said too much. They didn't call it love. Not yet. Malcolm kept playing at the bar. Eleanor kept showing up. Their words were brief, careful, but the way she looked at him, too long, too soft, was dangerous. And one night, someone else noticed. She was laughing at something he said. Nothing bold, nothing criminal, just a moment that lasted too long. That's when the door creaked open. A figure stepped in, slow, certain, silent. Harold Whitmore, her father. A judge, a name people whispered like a warning. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He watched them. Watched Eleanor standing too close to a black man. Watched Malcolm freeze, knowing exactly what this meant. And then he turned, walked out the door. No scene, no shouting, just the promise of ruin, carried in silence. Malcolm didn't sleep that night. His mind couldn't stop replaying the scene. The look Harold Whitmore gave him. Measured, quiet, lethal. That was no outburst. That was a verdict. The next morning, Malcolm found it, slipped under the garage door like a secret meant to be discovered. An ivory envelope, expensive paper. His name wasn't on it. It didn't need to be. Inside was a single piece of heavy cardstock, thick as bone. On it, written in ink, pressed hard enough to indent the page. "We know how to bury men like you so deep, not even God hears them." No threats, no curses, no explanation. Just a fact. Because that's how men like Harold Whitmore operated. Not with noise, but with silence wrapped around power. Malcolm stared at the words for a long time. He'd seen what happened to men who got too close to what they were never meant to touch. And this was a promise. One whispered in privilege, sealed with history. Days passed. Eleanor disappeared. No word, no visit. Just gone. Malcolm knew what that meant. Harold had locked her away. No phone, no mail, no way out. But Eleanor wasn't silent. 3 days later, a woman walked into the garage. Miss Thelma, the Whitmore's housekeeper. She didn't say much, just handed Malcolm a cloth-wrapped spark plug. Inside was a torn note. He says I disgraced him. He watches everything. I don't know how long I can pretend I'm still his daughter. If you still believe in us, wait, I'll come. And that was all Malcolm needed. She was alive, and still fighting. After the note, Malcolm waited. Days passed. Then a week. No sign. No message. Nothing. Every night he kept the bag by the door, half hoping, half dreading what might come next. Then one night, just past midnight, came the knock. 3 soft taps, not at the front, at the back of the garage. Miss Thelma stood there, breathless, her voice low. She's waiting by the tracks. Go now, and don't look back. Malcolm didn't ask how, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the bag, locked the door, and walked into the night. The air was thick with silence, but his heart roared. He reached the edge of town where the trees swallowed the old rail line, and there she was. Eleanor, hair pulled back, dress torn at the hem, a small suitcase in one hand, her mother's photograph in the other. She looked at him and said, breathless, "If we stay, we disappear." He nodded once, and together they climbed into a freight train filled with grain sacks and shadows, leaving behind everything that had tried to keep them apart. No destination, no guarantee, just the belief that love had to be worth running for. The train groaned through the night, heavy with metal and memory. Malcolm held Eleanor close, shielding her from the wind that screamed through the freight car walls. They said nothing. There was nothing left to say. By the second night, the train slowed through Iron Hill, New York, a factory town that smelled of smoke and hard labor. Not welcoming, not warm, but indifferent. And sometimes, indifference is the kindest thing you can find. Nobody stared. Nobody whispered. A black man and a white woman walking side by side got looks, but no one followed. They rented a single room in a crumbling boarding house. One narrow bed, thin walls, no questions asked. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. They married on a Tuesday. No guests, no flowers, no vows said loud enough for anyone else to hear. Just a tired preacher on the outskirts of Iron Hill who barely looked up from his Bible. There was no ring, no music, no kiss that drew cheers. Just hands clasped tightly, a promise made in silence, and a woman who no longer bore her father's name. Eleanor Pierce. After the ceremony, they walked home in the rain. Eleanor didn't flinch when her dress soaked through. She just looked up at the gray sky and smiled, like she'd never felt more clean in her life. They didn't speak of Willow Bend again. But some memories don't need retelling. They settle into the bones. Iron Hill never made room for them, but it didn't try to erase them either. And for Malcolm and Eleanor, that was enough. He worked long shifts at the steel mill, coming home every night with burns on his hands and soot on his clothes. She stitched garments in a factory basement, her fingers raw, her back aching. The work was hard, the pay was low, the kindness was rare, but no one told them to leave. And in a world that once tried to keep them apart, being invisible together was the closest thing to freedom. They saved every coin, shared everything, meals, tears, silence, exhaustion. They had no comfort, but they had each other. And slowly, painfully, they started to believe they could belong to something beyond survival. Then, one winter, Eleanor missed her period. When the test confirmed it, Eleanor just stood in the hallway, barefoot, stunned. She thought she'd feel joy. Instead, her knees buckled. Malcolm caught her before she hit the floor. "We're going to be all right," he whispered. "We made it this far." But Eleanor couldn't speak, because as she pressed a hand to her stomach, one truth rose in her throat like smoke. This wasn't her first child. At 17, she had given birth in secret. Her father had locked her away, called it a fever, and when it was over, the baby was gone. A boy. She was never allowed to hold him, never allowed to name him. The shame was buried, the silence enforced. But now, feeling life grow inside her again, everything she had spent years pushing down came back all at once. She smiled at Malcolm that night, but her thoughts were already drifting toward a boy who never got to be held, and a lie she had never dared to speak. Their son was born on a cold spring morning. Malcolm held him first, his hands trembling, his eyes wet with awe. Eleanor watched as he rocked their child gently, humming low, like he was cradling a future he never thought he'd live to see. They named him Nathaniel. He was everything they had crossed the line for. Proof that love, even in exile, could grow roots. But as Eleanor pressed her son to her chest, joy tangled with something else. Not fear, not doubt. Guilt. So she loved Nathaniel fiercely, and said nothing. But silence doesn't stay quiet forever. Nathaniel had been their beginning. Eleanor had poured herself into raising him, every scraped knee, every lullaby, every handmade shirt stitched with care. She gave him everything. But the more she gave, the quieter she became. At first, Malcolm thought it was just exhaustion. Raising a child in a new town, working long hours, scraping by. It wore on both of them. But Eleanor's silence wasn't from fatigue. It was from guilt. Nathaniel was her son, her joy. But he wasn't her first. The memory of that first child, taken, nameless, unseen, lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. And now, with every smile Nathaniel gave her, something inside her ached with what had been lost. She didn't speak of it. She couldn't. And Malcolm, though he felt the distance growing between them, didn't know why. Then came their daughter, Seraphina. Fierce, unapologetic, a storm with tiny feet and a voice that never cared who was listening. Eleanor held her tightly, but spoke even less. The house was louder than ever. But inside Eleanor, the silence was deafening. Malcolm noticed it most at night. After the children were asleep and the house had gone still, Eleanor would sit by the window, staring into nothing. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just drifted, like something inside her had loosened, come unanchored, and never returned. He tried to reach her, gently. He offered to take more shifts so she could rest. He cooked on the weekends, badly, hoping to make her laugh. He sat beside her in silence, hoping she'd speak first. But nothing worked. And what scared him most was that she didn't seem sad. She seemed gone. When Seraphina tumbled down the stairs and scraped her knee, Eleanor didn't react with panic. She didn't react at all. Just knelt, cleaned the cut, and returned to the chair by the window. Malcolm couldn't ignore it anymore. "You're here, but it's like you're not," he said one night. Eleanor looked at him, then away. "I'm tired," she whispered. But Malcolm had lived long enough to know the difference between tired and breaking. And Eleanor was breaking. Slowly, quietly. And he was about to find out why. She started fading before the sickness had a name. Some days, Eleanor moved like her body wasn't hers anymore. Present, but detached. Folding clothes without noticing which child they belonged to. Boiling water, then forgetting why. Malcolm noticed. And when she collapsed halfway down the hallway one afternoon, clutching the wall with shaking hands, he didn't hesitate. He carried her to the truck, drove in silence, prayed, not because he believed in miracles, but because he couldn't stand the thought of losing her without ever knowing why she'd drifted so far. At the clinic, the doctor examined her, then paused too long before speaking. "It's her heart," he said gently. "It's too weak to recover. There's nothing more we can do." Malcolm said nothing, just stared at the floor, holding the cold edge of the chair beneath him. On the way home, Eleanor barely looked out the window, and when they got inside, She sat in her old chair by the window and didn't move for hours. That night, she turned to Malcolm. Her voice wasn't frail. It was deliberate. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. And in that moment, he understood. She wasn't just dying. She was done running. Malcolm sat across from her, the only light in the room coming from the hallway. She was pale, fragile in a way he'd never seen before. But her eyes were steady. "Before I met you," she began slowly, "my father locked me away." Malcolm didn't move. "I was 17, pregnant. I didn't even know what was happening until it was too late." She paused. The silence between them felt dense, like it had been waiting years to be broken. "He said I was sick, hid me from everyone. No one visited. No one asked." Her hands twisted in her lap, fingers searching for something solid. "When the baby came, I didn't see him. Not even once. They took him from me like he was never mine." Malcolm's face didn't change, but his chest rose heavier with each breath. Eleanor looked up, voice cracking. "I buried it. I ran from it. I ran to you." She swallowed. "At first it wasn't love. It was escape. You were safe. And I hated myself for that, for not choosing you the way you deserved." Now she cried. "I built a life with you on top of a lie, not because I didn't love you, but because I was too ashamed to tell you the truth." She looked at him, expecting the worst, bracing for it. Malcolm sat still, jaw clenched, breath shallow. His hands were fists in his lap. "You came to me out of fear," he said, his voice hollow. "All this, our marriage, our children, you built it on guilt?" Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no defense. He stood, walked to the window, his back to her. The air between them pulsed with grief. Then he turned, and his eyes, glassy, exhausted, met hers. "You think I didn't know you were hiding something? You think I couldn't feel it in the space between our silences?" He knelt beside her. "You've been fighting to love me through pain I couldn't see. You didn't lie to me, Eleanor. You survived me. You survived all of this." His voice broke. "And I swear to God, I would rather know the whole of your truth than live one more day inside your silence." She sobbed, quiet, shaking sobs that curled her into herself. He gathered her into his arms, and for the first time since she was 17, she didn't feel like someone's shame. She felt loved, completely. In the days that followed, the house grew quieter, not from tension, but from a gentler kind of stillness. Malcolm didn't press Eleanor to talk. She didn't need to. The truth had already settled between them like something sacred, too fragile to be touched again. She was fading quickly now. Her hands grew colder, her steps slower. Malcolm stayed by her side. He read aloud when her vision blurred, cooked her favorite stew even when she barely touched it. He brushed her hair, slow and careful, like it was the only thing keeping her alive. One night, when the air turned sharp and the wind curled through the cracked window pane, Eleanor stirred in bed and whispered his name. "Malcolm." He leaned closer, clutching her hand between both of his. "I'm here," he said. Her lips trembled. "I wasn't brave, but I tried. I really tried." His voice cracked as he replied, "You were brave every day you stayed. Every day you chose love, even when it hurt." A long silence stretched between them. Then she exhaled, soft, steady, final. Her hand slipped still in his. He stayed like that for hours, not because he hadn't noticed, but because letting go felt too big for words. The days after Eleanor's death passed like they had no shape. Malcolm did his best to hold the house together. But something in the house felt unfinished, until the letter came. It arrived without a sound, just resting on the floor when he opened the door one morning. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single typed line. "Your son is looking for you." That was it. But Malcolm didn't need more. He stared at the paper for a long time, then slowly sat down at the table, the letter trembling between his fingers. He knew. It had come from Harold Whitmore. Eleanor had reconnected with him before the end. She hadn't said it, but the quiet in her final days carried a certain clarity, like someone who had tied up one last thread before letting go. She had asked her father to find the son she lost, and Harold, cold, cruel, and distant, had honored that request the only way he knew how. Malcolm sat with that for hours. Then he called his son and daughter in the living room. He knelt beside them, his face serious, but soft. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Before your mother met me, she had a child, a son. Her father took him away before she could even hold him." The room went still. "Before she passed, she tried to find him. And now, he's looking for us." Nathaniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Serafina blinked, confused. Malcolm looked at them both, his voice low, steady. "Your mother gave everything to protect this family. Now it's our turn, to protect the piece of her she never got back. He's out there, and one day, he may come looking for her." He let the silence settle in, heavy but true. Then he added, "If he ever finds us, you open the door." Time moved forward, even when they didn't. Nathaniel took over the books at the shop. Serafina started teaching music at the community center. Their laughter returned in pieces, smaller, quieter, but it returned. And Malcolm, he aged in silence. The pain of Eleanor's absence softened into something he wore, like an old coat. Familiar. Heavy. Always there. After he told them about the brother they never knew, no one asked when or how he might show up, but the thought never left them, especially not Serafina. She started watching the front porch like it was part of her morning routine. Coffee, newspaper, doorway. They waited without saying they were waiting, until one overcast afternoon, months later, someone knocked. Not frantically, not fearfully, just steady. Malcolm stood from the table without a word. Nathaniel and Serafina looked up from opposite ends of the room, no longer children, but still bracing like they were. He opened the door. A man in his early 50s stood on the porch, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes uncertain, but not afraid. "I think," he said quietly, "my mother's name was Eleanor Whitmore." Malcolm looked at him for a long moment. Then, without asking for proof or permission, he stepped aside and opened the door. Opening that door didn't rewrite history. It didn't erase the pain. But it honored her. It finished the sentence she had never been allowed to speak. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. It was something quieter, and maybe stronger. It was love, still showing up, even after goodbye. Some truths arrive too late to fix the past, but sometimes they're just in time to save the future. Have you ever wondered what truths were kept from you, not to hurt you, but to protect you? And if you discovered them, would you want to know? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, please subscribe to hear more voices that deserve to be heard. There are more truths worth telling. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.